Tshidi Madia, my guest.
It's the first day of the 7th administration, convening of parliament, So I dressed up for the occasion, just a little bit.
Listen,
Tiny bit.
Are you the only one that dressed up? Just have the politicians also taken the opportunity and taken it to the nth?
I think they did. They dressed up to the nines. They kind of make a big deal of today.
Yeah.
Obviously, they make a bigger deal of SONA.
Yes.
Then they stick to the national address. But some people are in their ball gowns, in their traditional garb. And of course, you've got the EFF in their
Traditional garb.
Makarapas and the like, in traditional garb. But in their workers' uniforms, yeah.
I'm
got
just-
journalists in suits and ties.
There's going to be another SONA. I'm wondering how you're going to up your game on
You must
today.
step up. You must find us. We're going to up the game for SONA. You need to step up. You must meet us there, yeah.
Listen, there was a bit of a feeling that I got, or maybe I was just over-imagining stuff. I was like, why can't everybody be in their makarapas? Why can't everybody be in their overalls? I just get the sense that this is a different session. It's about work this time round.
That's a good point. I think I'm not there yet in feeling about how it's about work. I think that there's still a bit of uncertainty in the air. I was looking at the political parties as they were arriving. They hadn't fully signed on the dotted lines. So that bit of anxiety and confusion was there. But I do think that this particular administration will be about actually getting the work done and trying to move the country in a particular direction, trying to find one another as opposed to fight one another. At least that's what I can tell from the MP's perspective for now.
You're one of the most resourceful people in politics at this moment in time, and I'm not able to get from anybody a sense of where things are at. Cards are pretty close to the chest. Or is there some bombs that you can drop on us?
Let me see. From what I understand from this morning, when they arrived to start the session just before 10, they had not signed on the dotted line. Something had happened in the negotiations going back and forth that left the DA feeling a little bit, the ANC rather, feeling a little bit uncomfortable, so they didn't sign on the dotted line. But the ANC had sent out an agreement, a notice of intent to the different political parties. I saw Gator McKenzie not too long ago saying, actually, we've crossed the red line. We are happy with what's happening. I remember hearing Dean McPherson and Tony Leon of the DA saying to me, if this deal does not go through, they can forget about KZN and everywhere else where they're meant to work together. Seemingly, things are on track. What I must flag for you is KZN, the margins are so tight. It'll take one NFP vote to swing things in one way or another. I think the parties are slightly concerned about potential sleepers, if you may. People who sneak into the system and try and vote the opposite direction. There were some concerns in the ANC that they needed to navigate. The DA feels quite comfortable. The IFP was a little bit anxious about what some of its own members will do.
NFP, are they kingmakers or are they making droog, like we would say on the Cape Flats?
I think they're kingmakers, but I think that somebody can usurp that position from them if they don't play it well. It is a secret vote. If two names are raised, they go into voting and in secret. And I think that's where there's a world of possibilities of things changing, but not here. But I think the numbers here are far too wide in terms of those who've agreed to work together. So I think that KZN remains, I think, the province to watch. But NFP in KZN, that one seat.
Yeah. Can they
crucial.
overplay their hand? Their one hand?
That's a very interesting question. I think it is always a possibility, but I think they've played it quite smart. They have chosen to go with the IFP-DA, ANC coalition, and part of the reason why I understood them to have done that is that the MK party also hasn't been coming to the party, so to speak, where they've asked to speak to other parties but haven't actually arrived. The IFP still aggrieved at this moment that it was kept waiting for a really long period by the MK party that simply didn't come to meetings, hours on end of just waiting to talk about what power sharing looks like, because some of these parties, particularly the ANC, has this principle that the party with the most votes has the responsibility to build the government, and people felt that the MK missed the moment. People felt that the EFF, last night when Julius Malema said he had called the ANC president, my initial sentiment was, geez, he folded. He picked up the phone and he called Ramaphosa. That's folding. But he then says, we don't want to be in a GNU, but we want to field a speaker or a deputy speaker, and we want to be supported by the ANC, and in turn will support their presidential candidate. That felt like another missed moment where the opportunity for them to have stepped in and to have acted that window's long gone. The opportunity to be at the negotiation table and to speak to the ANC had come past him, and he opted to use his relationship with the ANC president in order to get some headway. Somebody in the ANC said to me, when you want to talk about power sharing, you come to the negotiation table. You don't go to the president. He's not the negotiator.
They're claiming progressive label, the progressive cabal has been demanding meetings with the ANC president prior to today's very, very, very first sitting. We also saw Alan Ziller on a pretty intense telephone call out on the other side. That was just after 9:15 this morning. Clearly lots of moving parts, but you've alluded to that. Still lots of moving parts. Tell us about this progressive cabal. Are they causing the churn?
That interesting one, right? You've got Al Jamaa, which traditionally is always sided with the ANC, but has objections with having the ANC work with the DA. You've got the EFF leading that, the UDM. You've got multiple parties, very, like, I think together they maybe form about 48 seats. So it's almost inconsequential in terms of what they're able to do if the bigger parties agree to work together. They are attempting at the last minute to actually have some sort of sway. What I understand that the ANC has done with its document of intent, it's been sent to pretty much everybody except for maybe 3 parties. The parties that I think have been left out include the the EFF, the MK, and Action SA. Action SA had said that it's not necessarily interested in moving that direction. That tells you that to some degree a UDM has been considered for in one way or another. And I think that's the kind of interesting picture that we are kind of waiting to see unfold, is when the GNU finally takes shape, what does it actually look like? Is it simply a question of having 8 to 9 DA ministers and deputy ministers? Is it, because from what I last heard, it will have 3 IFP ministers? Well, it will have a greater mix and representation. These are part of the issues where, again, there was a clause of, I think, the 16th clause in this document around governance that was a sticking point. But somebody else said it's just a question about phrasing, and recognizing that these parties are not getting into a marriage, that they need to find a way to work together. But in terms of this tiny umbrella of the so-called progressive bloc, I don't see how much impact they will have, especially because they try to force a meeting only this morning and about an hour or so before the start of proceedings.
Tell us about the time frame to the meaty stuff emerging, as understanding the architecture of GNU. When are they going to take us into their confidence and say, this is how we've considered all of these things in the future that South Africa is due?
Can I tell you, Clarence, I'm impatient about that myself, okay? I want to see what does it look like. But what I do understand now is multiple conversations are happening at the same time. So as they're going back and forth about working together, having the broad agreement, supplying confidence, if we may, they also are having conversations with individuals that they want to see fielded to particular departments. They've looked at particular MPs and thought, is this person fit for the police ministry? Maybe Durko. Do you bring somebody so-and-so back? I was actually looking out for somebody like an Ibrahim Rasool, because that's not somebody that I think will make a turn to parliament if he ever does, or occupy just the seats in parliament. I think if you see him walking through these halls, and I haven't spotted him, it would have meant that he has greater office awaiting.
As in Durko?
Maybe. I'm not saying anything. I'm also saying there are people who occupy particular positions in metros, in different provinces, who I know have been asked to consider whether they should stay or should they go. Those are the conversations. So there is a team of, in my opinion, different skill sets, kind of dynamic people that they are trying to talk to, because I think that they're also at a point where they are having this challenge of putting the country forward, right? Country first. They're forced to put the country first, and the kind of team that they come up with as far as cabinet is concerned would have to be a representative of that. So they are having very interesting conversations. I know the Patriotic Alliance has put its finger hand up saying it wants police, it wants home affairs, or even sports. I don't think it will get those big ministries, particularly because the ANC's NEC itself is still looking to occupy strategic ministries.
I want to understand that.
Home affairs are strategic.
What is absolutely important to the ANC? What is sacrosanct to the ANC? This is not negotiable. We will have these portfolios. Would it be Durko? Would it be police?
what is sacrosanct is the union buildings itself, actually, Clarence. Think about it. When they were going into the negotiations, when they were still at the Rock, the ANC was almost willing to trade off on anything to remain at the union buildings. But I also wanted, and I see their chosen candidate, is they also wanted to hold on to Panyaza Lesufi. They didn't even mind the idea of trading off on a Gauteng if it meant retaining the premier in Panyaza Lesufi. Another interesting thing about the way it approached negotiations, because there's a lot of humble pie being eaten across the political spectrum, is that when they started these negotiations, from my understanding, they were trying to offer these parties deputy ministries. And parties said, yes, you could make that argument if you're a 50% party, but you're not. You're 40%. You must make key concessions. But what I also think is interesting about the way these negotiations have unfolded, especially at this hour, is the ANC wants to make an argument that they've been dealing with negotiations forever and a day. This country's settlement was negotiated, and by and large, some of the people who were part of those negotiations remain at the table to date. And the ANC believes that it's been able to finesse, if you may, some of the partners that they're talking to. But that devil, we can only see the detail really when the dust settles and we see who's appointed to what cabinet, what appointments in terms of committees are concerned. And I think who they pick as a speaker and a deputy speaker will also be quite telling about what the way forward is.
Are you impressed by the ANC's ability or appetite for humble pie?
I'm not surprised. I think I remain impressed because that is the right attitude.
Yeah.
In order to go, okay, this is the will of the people. The people have spoken. They don't want us
It's
in
a far
power
cry
at
from
that
the
level.
arrogant nature that it had not too long ago.
Absolutely, that's to be expected. I mean, I've seen them in 2016. I saw the shock in their faces when they started losing the metros in 2016. This, I think, was expected, and you could kind of see it in their attitudes, including just outside of the ANC, including Julius Malema. I saw him in Seshego just before the elections, and he spoke about how if the people don't want us, nobody blocked us from campaigning anywhere. We will have to accept that that's not the message that the country is looking for. So, across the political spectrum, there was an expectation that they weren't going to do well. The ANC, I think, expected it. The ANC expected to do worse, from my understanding. I didn't have the shock that they had in 2016, but I think they should be applauded, and it's a difficult one because in a democratic environment, the change of power should be seamless, should be smooth. It's not what we see often on our continent, and so I think that there is also a thing where people have taken a step back to recognize that the ANC is a party willing to accept that it will lose power and manage it with some level of grace, if you may. I mean, people speak about how Fikile Mbalula suddenly sounds like a Secretary General, what he was expected to sound like. But I think that they've handled this in a way that they've built it, where you've put together the tenets that uphold this democracy. It is your responsibility to respect whatever the outcome is. And I think the ANC is seemingly being seen to do that. I think they make for a dismal opposition party. They don't understand opposition politics. But the willingness to go sit at those benches or to try and work with other people is an important part of our journey and how they handle
We're
themselves.
still going to have to judge them on the work that they're going to be doing in this next...
Absolutely. There's not even a question. We judge them all, and I think that's the difficulty for the DA, is they'll be judged along with whatever government they serve
It's
with
easy
under
to be in opposition.
the ANC. Yeah.
Now, let's just... one last thing, and it's coming through the WhatsApp line. There was one standout little message that read, "The ANC has united South Africa again."
How? What are we united in? I'm struggling a little bit to agree with that. I mean,
clutching at straws here.
Are we united in saying you got what you deserve? I think we're at an interesting place as a country. We have an opportunity to press the reset button. I don't liken this moment to 1994. I know a lot of people do, and I know a lot of the talk about the GNU makes people think about 1994. But the conditions were very different, and the ANC itself was a very different organization when it went through that period. I think the ANC it's worlds away from what its leadership was back in 1994. But I do think that this presents a great moment for us to maybe
It's a
work
suggestion
towards...
that this is the high road. Is it the high road?
I couldn't see any other road, though. I don't think that they had any other option but to be responsible. I spoke to Pravin Gordhan this week, and he spoke about how historically the ANC has been able to marshal the country to chart a particular path, and that the ANC has been called to do yet again the same thing. And I think that's accurate. The ANC is being asked to rise to an occasion and to manage it really well. So Whether they unite us or not will depend on what happens in the coming months. I don't believe that this marriage will last all 5 years. So the kind of deal that they put together, the kind of transparency when the dust settles as to how these deals have been approached and dealt with will be quite telling. Also what happens in our metros, because I've always argued since 2021 that the metros will be in a state of instability, at least until the national elections. And we're watching movements in Ekurhuleni. I'm expecting movements in Johannesburg in the coming weeks. So that will also be telling whether or not they can set us on the right path.
Movements that align with GNU alignment.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But you must always remember, Clarence, just before I forget, that our constitution by design speaks of power sharing. So we are moving towards what this country's constitution envisioned in one way or another. If that unites us behind being of service to the people, because I think that's actually what should be at the heart of how they function, then we are okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your absolutely clear mind, Tshidi Madia, EWN Associate Politics Editor.